Someone I want to see.
My friend Sherlock Holmes.
221B Baker Street.
Hello there. Welcome to my review of The Return of Sherlock Holmes, Series 2, Episode 4, The Bruce-Partington Plans. This episode opens with a suspicious-looking man, identified as Mr. West, buying a train ticket. We then cut to some rail yard workers stumbling on the dead body of none other than Mr. West. This is probably the simplest, but certainly one of the most effective prologues we've had so far. We meet a man, the man is murdered, the mystery begins. It's a real masterclass in concise visual storytelling, with very little dialogue. After this, we once again visit Baker Street as Watson is reading his paper and Holmes is desperately bored.
Nothing in the paper, Watson?
No, there's another revolution in South America.
It's a real pea souper.
On a particularly foggy night in old London town. As a side note, if you're ever wondering why London had a reputation for being so foggy when it isn't today, it was because of the smog. There were various heavy industries that occupied the densely packed city during the Industrial Revolution, and a combination of clean air regulations and the gentrification of the city over the years has eliminated the smog, and with it greatly reduced the density and frequency of foggy nights. Once again, Holmes laments the lack of quality criminals for him to pursue, and Watson humours him. Mrs. Hudson gives him a telegram letting him know his brother Mycroft is going to pay him a visit. Holmes finds this very unusual, as Mycroft does not break his habits under any circumstances, but is coming to discuss the death of Mr. West. We then get some tantalising details about Mycroft's backstory and his unique position within the civil service.
The conclusions of every government department are passed to him. He is the central exchange, which makes out the balance.
It's a welcome return of Charles Grey as Mycroft, and he's as eccentric and over the top as he was in his previous appearance.
I've never seen the Prime Minister so upset. And as to the Admiralty, buzzing like an overturned beehive.
He quickly explains West had the blueprints for the Bruce-Partington submarine in his pocket when he was killed, blueprints which were normally kept under the highest level of security. And while they have recovered some of the plans which were still on the body, there are several pages missing, which Mycroft insists Holmes must find.
This is a real international crisis that you have to solve.
There are some points of interest in the case, I suppose.
Holmes's nonchalant response to this plea is very entertaining and completely in keeping with his character, although it's clear from the glint in his eyes that he's interested and agrees to take the case. Bradstreet gives him some more information about who held the keys to the plans and posits a theory Holmes finds plausible, but that leaves him in a similar position to the second stain. The thief is dead and the buyer of the plans is in the wind, but, as then, he still agrees to investigate anyway. Inspecting where the body was discovered, he finds it curious that there was no train ticket on the body and very little blood for such a violent death, and is struck with inspiration. He has a new working theory on what happened to the plans for the Bruce-Partington, or at least part of one, and explains to Watson that West was killed elsewhere, then put on the roof of the train, falling off where the train took a corner. One of the best things about Holmes and Watson's relationships is that it allows Holmes to let us in on where he is in the case, if that's needed. Strangely, it's a contrivance that suits visual media far more than the written word, where the author could easily let us in on what Holmes was thinking. But if you're crafting a mystery story, you may not want to let the audience in on what the detective is thinking, and so the contrivance still works. For a medium that wasn't invented when Doyle was first writing Holmes, though, it is perfect for the delivery of necessary exposition, and one that I think is never as well utilised as it is within the Holmes stories. Holmes and Watson arrive at the manor house of Sir James Walter, the man in charge of the plans, and are mistaken for undertakers, as Sir James has also died, apparently from the shock of the theft, as explained by his brother, Colonel Valentine Walter. They then visit West's fiancée, who is able to explain West was a vehemently honest man, and had been concerned about how easy it was to get at the plans. On the night he was killed, they were on their way to the theatre, and when passing by his office, he suddenly dashed off, never to return.
I'm afraid I've got to leave you.
Leave me?
It's very, very important. I'm sorry. You'd better go home.
Knowing where this story goes, I would say that his lack of urgency when leaving his fiancée in this scene is a small issue with the staging of this scene, but the surreptitious way he approaches his office is ambiguous enough that it makes up for this. I understand why the first part of the scene was shot this way, as it might have given away more than it needed to, but I also think this could have been kept ambiguous with a little extra effort. She takes Holmes and Watson to where he left her, and Holmes investigates the scene. He gets a tour of West's office from the senior clerk, a cameo by the wonderful character actor Geoffrey Belden, who explains that one of the rescued plans is vital to the submarine's construction, and, having reconstructed how the room looked on the night of West's death, Holmes has a much better idea of what actually occurred. Back at Baker Street, Holmes reaches his theory, as another telegram from Mycroft gives Holmes a list of possible buyers for the plans, which confirms what Holmes had thought. Holmes's earlier alacrity regarding his theories has now given way to a certain level of secrecy as he pursues the case without Watson, and while this could have come off as frustrating, it is what makes this a mystery story. We've been given all the clues Holmes is willing to show us, and we can either enjoy watching him solve it from here or try to work it out ourselves, although in this case some of the information he has is greater than our own. This is something I enjoy about watching this series. Holmes visits the address of one of the names on Mycroft's list, a Hugo Oberstein, but does not go in, instead meeting Watson at a cafe, who has brought some tools as instructed. Holmes explains that Oberstein's house backs onto the train track, and the train stops just below one of his windows. It was he who deposited West's body there, but the house is currently empty, and Holmes plans to break in to either find the plans or to spook Oberstein into giving up their location. Not the first time Holmes has broken the law, although at least he has the implicit approval of the government this time, which actually might be worse. But anyway, he and Watson ransack the place, and while they don't discover the plans, Watson discovers Oberstein had been burning newspapers, which gives Holmes a vital clue. He was communicating with the thief, calling himself Pierrot, via the agony column of the Telegraph, giving Holmes the opportunity to lay a trap by leaving his own message. That evening they, accompanied by Mycroft and Bradstreet, capture not Oberstein but Valentine Walter. He was the thief, using his brother's connections to gain access to the plans. West spotted him stealing the plans and followed him to Oberstein's, but Walter claims Oberstein was the murderer. Colonel Walter was desperate for money and had no idea the strain would kill his brother. Holmes sees an opportunity to capture Oberstein with a vital detail of the sub not in his hands, and lays a new trap for him, which they execute flawlessly. This is a superb episode, all around. The mystery, the performances, the plotting, the execution, all top-notch. It's complicated enough that you do have to pay attention, but not so complicated as to become exasperating. But what I really love about it is it has additional layers we don't always get from the Holmes stories. For example, in the first scene at Baker Street, Holmes states that it's a good thing for London that he isn't a criminal. And then later on in the story, he has to do a spot of burglary to conclude the case, in a wonderful piece of foreshadowing. But more significant than that is the relationship between the two different sets of brothers here. In both cases, one a government employee and one not. But whereas the Holmes brothers may be largely emotionless, they're also fiercely loyal to justice and to each other. Compare that to the Walters, where one brother is honest, but the other turns to theft and treason, exploiting his sibling and inadvertently causing that sibling's death, as well as the death of another completely innocent man. Eventually assisting the authorities once he's caught, only to try and escape again, never facing up to his responsibilities. It's a really wonderful way to develop the character of Sherlock for the audience, subtle enough that it's not drawn attention to, but is present. He chooses the righteous path, even if it means doing something wrong, when he could easily not. He shows genuine affection and familial relationship with Mycroft that is far more modern than one might expect from a Victorian writer. All in all, this is a fabulous episode and easily a 5 out of 5. Thank you. Goodbye.